In the still, silent kingdom beneath the Atlantic, where light dissolves into cold blue haze and forgotten steel sleeps under a century of pressure, the Titanic rests like a ghost caught between worlds. For decades, divers and historians have explored its fractured decks, its torn hull, its once glittering interiors reduced to rusted bones. Yet every expedition, no matter how experienced, carries within it the same electric whisper. What has been missed? What waits in the untouched pockets of darkness? And what stories linger in the drowned chambers where human hands once cooked, cleaned, and celebrated life? It was this question that guided the latest expedition, a mission not to retrieve treasure, nor artifacts, but to map the last unopened sections of the ship's lower service decks. What the team found was something unexpectedly intimate. The kitchens, pantries, and walk-in refrigerators of a vanished world, still sealed, still waiting. The discovery began with a narrow passage choked with corrosion and draped in curtains of brown ferrous bacteria. For years, this section had been considered inaccessible, too collapsed to safely enter. But new micro-submersibles, narrow as a human torso and equipped with stabilizing thrusters, allowed the team to slip through gaps no diver could reach. The cameras pushed slowly forward, illuminating the long corridor with a soft artificial glow. Dust rose like underwater snow. The silence was absolute. Then the submersible turned a corner, and the team saw it. A row of industrial refrigerator doors, still closed, still upright, still holding their shape after more than 100 years under crushing pressure. At first, the explorers assumed the interiors would be empty. Any organic matter after so long would have dissolved, dispersed, or been consumed by bacterial colonies. But the sealed nature of the compartments presented a different possibility, one so improbable that no one dared voice it. The pilot maneuvered the mechanical arm toward the first handle, its metal frame covered in brittle layers of rust lace. The claw clasped, pulled, and with a muffled groan that seemed to echo across time itself, the refrigerator door swung open. Inside was a scene no one expected. The shelves, though softened and warped, still held their cargo. Rows of bottles, many intact. Crates of canned goods draped in white silt. And fruits, astonishingly preserved in form, their colors muted by decades of mineralization and thin veils of sponge growth. It was as if time had paused, holding its breath, preserving a small snapshot of the world as it had been on that tragic April night. A cluster of greenish-yellow apples rested on one shelf. Their skins were puckered, but recognizable, shimmering faintly under the lights. Nearby, a row of champagne bottles stood like soldiers frozen mid-salute. Some labels remained partially legible, their ink softened into watercolor blotches. Further back, nestled against the far wall, were metal trays once used for storing meats and fish. These, too, were covered in a fine film of microbial sponge, giving them the appearance of being dusted with a pale undersea snow. But the most astonishing sight was the presence of preserved dairy and dessert items. Jars of jams whose contents had solidified into ruby-colored masses, wheels of cheese, nearly fossilized with marine calcification, and a tray of pastries that had collapsed into delicate sculptural shapes. In the cold darkness of the ocean floor, where temperatures hover near freezing, and in the oxygen-poor interiors of the sealed units, these foods had transformed not into decay, but into relic-strange hybrids of organic and mineral worlds. Divers, watching from the support vessel above, fell silent as the footage streamed in. It was not a moment of scientific triumph, but of emotional weight. These were not just abandoned objects. They were remnants of daily life. They belonged to the cooks who had risen before dawn, the waiters who rushed through hallways balancing silver trays, the wealthy passengers who dined without ever seeing the frantic work behind the scenes. Every loaf of bread, every bottle of wine, Every fruit crate had been part of the system designed to keep nearly 3,000 people fed during a transatlantic crossing. And now, here they were, untouched by human hands for over a century, waiting in the dim silence like offerings to memory. Further exploration revealed more refrigerators aligned along the corridor, each containing its own preserved microcosm of the past. In one unit, rows of citrus fruits floated within a collapsed mesh basket, their surfaces mottled with orange and white sponge growth that mimicked frost. In another, the team found surviving bottles of mineral water, their glass warped but unbroken, beads of trapped air shimmering inside like pearls. Astonishingly, several shelves still contained packages wrapped in linen cloth, perhaps bakery ingredients or spices. The cloth had disintegrated into delicate threads, but its shape and texture were still readable, like a ghostly imprint. The most surreal discovery came in the pantry refrigerator, where loaves of bread, although flattened and mineralized, had retained the signature scoring marks made by the ship's bakers. The grooves were faint, but visible beneath the translucent biological film clinging to the crust. The sight triggered an almost painful sense of connection. Somewhere on the Titanic's final afternoon, a baker had carved those lines with quick, practiced motions, never imagining that his handiwork would outlive him. Beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ocean, as the submersible moved deeper into the pantry section, yet another refrigerator door slowly swung open under the machine's guidance. This one revealed an array of glass jars filled with preserved fruits, cherries, oranges, and pears suspended in once sugary syrups that had long since thickened into crystalline sediment. Some jars had collapsed under the pressure of the deep, their contents blooming outward in soft, gelatinous clouds, immediately colonized by filter-feeding organisms. Others, miraculously, had remained sealed, their lids held tight by corrosion, preserving an alien world of colors and shapes that no human eye had witnessed in more than 100 years. The marine biologists on the team were first to speak, whispering observations about the unique microecosystems that had developed inside the open jars. Each one had become a tiny habitat, home to specialized bacteria and sponge colonies that thrived on the trapped nutrients. In a sense, the Titanic's food stores had not died, they had evolved. They had become part of the ship's ongoing life cycle on the seabed. But for the historians and documentarians, the discovery carried a different significance. These refrigerators represented one of the most intimate connections ever found between the Titanic and the people who had lived and died aboard it. Artifacts like jewelry and china, while beautiful, belonged to the public face of the ship, the elegance, the wealth, the spectacle. Food, on the other hand, belonged to the private, everyday reality of the voyage. It spoke of routines, of meals, prepared with care, of conversations at dinner tables, of crew members sharing quick bites between duties, of simple human rituals now frozen in time. With every new refrigerator opened, the team felt as if they were stepping further into the ship's heartbeat. There were storage rooms containing crates labeled with now faded stencils. Poultry, flour, butter. There were shelves lined with bottles of wine and whiskey, their corks darkened but holding firm. One refrigerator contained rows of milk jugs, their contents solidified into chalk-white masses draped in thin mats of sea sponge. Another revealed stacks of chocolates wrapped in foil that had fused into clusters under the immense pressure. Each discovery raised countless questions. How had these items survived so long? What specific environmental conditions had preserved their shapes? Could chemical analysis reveal more about early 20th century food production, preservation, or shipboard storage? Researchers began planning detailed studies even as they watched the live feed, already imagining laboratory tests that could extract microscopic information from the mineralized preserves. Yet amid all the scientific excitement, a deeper, quieter feeling lingered. A sense of stepping into a time capsule, built not of intention, but of tragedy and circumstance. These foods were meant to nourish a journey that never finished. They were prepared for breakfasts that were never served, dinners that were never plated, celebrations that never happened. Now they rested like offerings to memory, suspended between eras, sheltered by steel and darkness. As the submersible concluded its survey, pulling back from the pantry corridor, the camera captured one last lingering shot. A refrigerator door drifting slightly in the current, open like an invitation, its interior glowing softly under the artificial lights. Inside, rows of bottles sparkled faintly, each one holding its own silent story. It was a haunting image, one that distilled the essence of exploration, not the search for treasure, but the search for understanding, for connection, for the fragments of humanity that survive against impossible odds. When the footage was reviewed on the support vessel, the room fell quiet again. No one spoke for several minutes. It was as though the ocean itself had whispered a secret one, preserved in darkness, discovered by chance, and now shared with the world like a fragile memory resurfaced from the deep. The refrigerators of the Titanic, sealed for more than a century, had finally opened their doors, revealing not just their long-lost contents, but a reminder of life's fleeting, ordinary moments.